you rarely give interviews, so we really appreciate this.
Ask me anything.
Where did this story come from? How did it occur to you? Is it something from life? Is it something?
It occurred to me because I was thinking, for what movie can I be sued by a studio? I know that if I did a comedy, they would like it, so I chose this movie, and that's how it came to me. What is a movie that has no laughs?
This movie has a lot of laughs.
It does have a lot of laughs, but not the cheery kind.
No.
Okay.
But the genesis of
Well, have you all seen the movie? I don't know. Mm-hmm. I have not been told anything about you guys.
They just saw the movie.
Then you know the movie, okay.
Yeah.
They literally just saw it.
Yeah, so there's no worry about giving away anything.
No, okay.
So
yes.
I know that Quentin Tarantino.
So what did you ask me again?
Well,
I'm sorry.
Tarantino.
I wasn't listening. Yeah.
I hear that a lot for some reason. Tarantino in his podcast had the same question I did. How did this film come in your head? Is this something based on people you know or knew, or is it just a flight of fancy? And he actually called you up and you told him the genesis of this story.
You spoke to Tarantino?
No, you did. You did.
Well, how did you know I did?
Because of his podcast. In his podcast, he explains that he called you and you told him the rather stunning explanation of where this film started. Really.
What did I say? Quickly.
Well, is this based in reality, or are these people you know? Are these relatives? Are these these
yes.
two characters?
All of the answers to that is yes.
Okay. Well, we thank you for coming, everybody.
Yes, these people are sort of my family. Not they aren't my family, but they are familiar. I know these people. They're real people. They're John and Peter.
Well, Tarantino says that it came from a couple of people you knew or heard about, or actually knew or heard about.
Well, Tarantino will say anything.
Well, that you knew of two people who were in actuality brothers, who were...
Actually, they were our neighbors. One of them was our neighbors, and the other one was his brother, and they were gangsters, and so were we, and so we all knew each other. And my mother would tell the story about they worked for. I'm trying to think of who they worked for. He was so famous and a gangster, and he had.
Al Capone?
No.
He'd put a hit out on one of them, on the older one. They were brothers. And the mother, when they called to get him to come down at 10:30 at night, and she knew that it was to kill him. Such a terrible story. But she sent the younger brother. She sent the older brother because she loved the younger brother more. And my mother told me this story. It could be totally untrue. Because she went along, but this is what she told me. And the neighbors that we had were, when I was a little girl, were just a nice woman, gray-haired woman, chubby woman. She had a picture of her chubby husband. She had a chubby kid. And I asked about her husband, and my mother said, because this was long after I was old enough to understand this, my mother said that they were brothers, this chubby guy and a rather good-looking younger guy, and that the mother of both guys, they were brothers, had received a call from a guy named Mickey Cohn, who was a gangster, about 10:30 at night, who said that he wanted to see, I think the younger guy. But my mother said, so complicated. but the mother of both boys liked the younger boy better, so I forget this story. When I told it to Tarantino, God knows, I had plenty of time. and he asked me questions as I went along. Does anybody have anything to ask about what I just said?
So they were brothers, and the mother was essentially given a Sophie's Choice kind of situation where...
No, actually, you don't know. She was told to send the boy down, who was the younger boy, who was sort of mischievous and probably stole something, because the interesting thing about gangsters in Chicago, or in our family, is that it was a little like a Greek story. If you stole, they didn't, you didn't go to trial or anything, they killed you. So nobody really stole much. I mean, they were very careful. And the other thing is nobody who actually knew they had done something and there was a hit out on them left town. It was as though it was their fate. It's sort of like a Greek play. They just stayed, and they always called their best friend because they needed a best friend. And the best friend had always been told by the guy who ran the gang that if he gets a call, he's got to put a hit out on the guy. I mean, the best friend always turned him in, always. And how they didn't remember that from the last time, I don't know. But that's what happened, time and again. It was like a Greek play. You just sort of knew you were going to get it. You stole anyway, but you knew you were going to get it, unlike going to trial as we do now and being let off. But, yes, next question.
Okay, a question more related to the film itself.
Yes.
I know that probably in most people's mind here, and most people who see the movie for the first time, whenever they see the movie, because of your background in improvisation and
No.
You know what I'm going to ask you, right?
Yes, you're going to ask me if there was any improvisation.
Right.
It's impossible to improvise a movie that has a plot that's going to have to end. You know that these guys are something's going to have to happen to them at the end. And the front of the movie is all about setting that up with their family. You can't improvise a movie like that. It's impossible should you ever want to try. You can improvise a loose comedy, but not something that is so plotted. It's just, you have to stay with the setup, as we call it.
And yet,
Yeah.
you were dealing with one of your two main actors is somebody who is very famous for making movies that are largely improvised. Did you have some?
No.
Did he want to improvise in this movie?
Nobody wanted to, but they were both very good. They were both method actors, John Cassavetes and Pete. They were only interested in who they were as characters. In fact, they wanted to know. I had to write out the first part of the movie as a movie for John, who couldn't figure out what he'd done wrong. And Peter wanted to find out about just gangsters because he didn't know gangsters, and I sent him to my mother. And my mother, he said he mentioned some extremely famous gangsters. Name some famous gangsters, and I'll pick them out for you.
I said Al Capone.
Well, yeah.
Not Al
but
Capone.
Nicky
Keep going.
who
Jewish
was
gangsters?
Who?
Jewish gangsters?
who?
Not a Jew.
Oh,
Who?
Lucky Luciano.
No, well.
You got it. You mean older?
They
who,
made
who
a
was the
movie
person
about
with the
a
Joe
distant
Louis?
figure. Anyway, Peter asked my mother about him, and my mother said my mother knew him. He gave money to Israel every year. He bought a tree every year. He gave money to his mother. He went to temple on high holidays. He was a wonderful boy. And Peter said he was he said nothing else. Because my mother considered him, although he was a killer and a gangster, a wonderful boy, because he did those things which are sort of important. Money to Israel, wonderful to his mother, and to temple every year when holidays.
Is this? Are we talking about the fellow from Las Vegas? Meyer Lansky?
No.
Yeah.
Keep
Oh,
going.
Bugsy Siegel.
Bugsy Siegel.
Thank you.
Who said that?
Tell him what he won.
Tell him. Bugsy Siegel, you're a wonderful boy.
So how did you come upon those two guys? Was Peter first? Did John come second?
Well, Peter, we were friends, all of us, but Peter and they just seemed right. I mean, Peter seemed right and John seemed right. They just seemed right.
Did you have them in mind as you wrote, or
No,
did
I
that-
wrote this. I wrote this when I was still improvising in Second City in Chicago. I wrote it as a little play, and then when I started doing, because I never forgot it, it was such a terrible tale that the mother had sent the younger one, killed, that I wrote it as it was like a little one act. And then when I started to do movies, I thought this would be a good movie. You know, and then I wrote it as a movie. And then I knew Peter and John, and then they were perfect. I mean, they were absolutely perfect. I didn't have to look.
And when Disney approaches you about the upcoming musical, who do you...
Well, they're dead. So whoever sings, I guess.
So is that also true of some of the other actors like Ned Beatty
Yes.
and the women who
Well,
are so amazing
Joyce
in the
is still
movie?
alive. One of the women is still alive.
I didn't mean alive or dead, but I meant I meant that you cast them because they were friends.
Oh, I thought because they were dead. No. Actually, the girl in it, the blonde girl, was Walter Matthau's wife. And she seemed so perfect to me. She too seemed perfect when I met her. She spoke like that, and she was really wonderful in it. So I cast her.
All the women in this movie are just tremendous.
You knew her
They were
because of
very good.
New
What?
Leaf. You knew her because of the New Leaf. Walter Matthau's wife. You knew.
How did you know
How
her?
did you know
Because
her?
I'd done a movie with Walter Matthau.
Yeah, okay.
And while doing that movie, his wife had come to the set, and we became friends. Yeah, you kind of became friends with whoever you worked with, because you worked with them every day for weeks.
And
yeah.
and Joyce Van Patten, who's Dick Van
Joyce Van
Patten's sister.
Patten, I just vaguely knew, but she's such a good actress. She's a wonderful actress. Still is.
And Rose Eric, Mikey's wife, you had worked with back in Chicago with the Compass Players.
You know
and-
everything. Yes.
No, but I mean,
Yes,
and she
I
has
had.
been in
Yeah.
each of your movies, pretty much. She was in a New
Yes, I
Leaf.
wanted to put her in, yeah.
Yeah, and they're all tremendous.
I'm sorry that I'm not better at this. First of all, it was a long time ago, and it's a very hard movie to explain because its the beginning is complicated and it's thing. And people always ask if it was improvised, because I improvised and I guess John improvised. But no, if anything has never been improvised. But one part of it was improvised. You want to know which? There was a scene in which they're on a bus, and they're driving toward a place, I think, where John is supposed to be shot, but Peter has set him up. And they were driving on it. It was a long drive, and on impulse, there was one of the extras was actually from a class of mine, and I said, make up a line, because they were sitting in front of her. I said, just make up a line and do it, just to throw them, because I thought they have nothing to do on this drive. And she did, and what she said to them was, no, because they were smoking, she said, no smoking on the bus, was what she made up. And they didn't know that I had told her to do that. And they were insane with rage. And she said, well, was it wrong? I said, no, do it again. She did it again. And she said, she tapped him on the shoulder. They were doing this dramatic thinking scene. And they turned, she said, no smoking on the bus. And she said, no, damn it. I said, but John realized that I had done it. Peter didn't. Peter was incensed that this extra kept annoying him. The third time she did it, because John just knew. John turned around, and I forget what he said. Shut up, he said. She said, they had this little fight, but it was nice. It broke it up for John. It was
a great moment.
It was the one improvised thing in the movie. And you didn't know. Ask me anything.
Well, the movie is editorially sort of and writing wise extremely economical. You have said, I've heard you say, that when you write and when you make a film, no scene can be about one thing. It's almost like a scene always has to be about more than one thing, or it's
I didn't say that to you, but it's an interesting thought.
well, I mean, take the Ned Beatty scene for example, Warren, the hitman, and he's in the hotel room. He's looking at a map. He's trying to, he's on the phone to somebody getting details about a murder. And all of these things simultaneously without even an establishing shot or anything. You learn all of these things at the same time.
I don't think that's true.
And you also he's in he's in a hotel room because you hear the little television playing in the background, and you get the sense that he's been waiting around and waiting around and waiting around. And you know all of that without ever having to explain it. Not an establishing shot, nothing. And on top of it, when he finishes talking, this hitman talking to the person who is setting up Nicky to be killed, you cut, in a single cut, to Mikey hanging up the phone in the bar, and he's been talking to him, and suddenly the movie turns on a dime. You were thinking that this guy has come to, and it's his oldest best friend, and he's going to help him, and now
Do you really?
He set
I've
him
always
up.
wondered when the audience would guess or think that this was a setup, that one of the guys was setting that Nicky was setting Mikey up. But you only knew when they cut away from them, huh?
No,
For the first time when
the
we cut
first
to the
time.
phone.
Well, yes, I mean that.
But then you have like
for
this
the first
long,
time.
long close-up of John saying who was on the
Did
phone.
you wonder? Even before that?
Well, you believe that Nicky knew. Nicky was suspicious all the time.
Right, yes.
But, Mikey has that great line that I love, I got your towel.
I
came
can't
to see you
I
could
can
tell.
yeah.
But, you were talking about the humor being dark, but there's so many funny moments in the movie that, how do you separate that kind of idea? Like, for instance, when Nicky says, "Ma, if anything happens to me, Mikey did it." And then he says it again in the graveyard, and then he starts talking about death and things. So, I mean, it actually becomes humorous, the way he kind of throws.
It's the way they, it is characteristic. It's the way they spoke. I mean, that's what's their joke. Ma, if anything happened to me, Mikey, here's an interesting thing. During the movie, Peter would occasionally say, "Does he know?" Meaning John. I said, "Well, he read the script. Of course he knows." And he said, "I mean, in the movie that we're doing, does John know? Does Nicky know that?" I said, "I have no idea if he knows or when he knows. I really don't know." But the fact that he was so interested, he was so involved in it, Peter, that he just didn't know whether Nicky or John suspected him. He was very nervous about it. He kept asking me. I said, I don't know. I've never asked him. But if he read the script, yes, he knows. But he had such belief in the movie, Peter. He really did. He just, such belief in what he was playing. So didn't want John to know. They were actually very good friends in life. So it worked out well.
They are like brothers.
Well, they weren't. Yeah, well, they were close. Yes.
Yeah.
And Peter was genuinely wondered. It was such a good actor's question. Does he know in the movie? Does Nicky know? Does the character he's playing know? And I had no idea. I had no idea when John knew.
It's hard to believe that in terms of the editing because, like, again, when he gets off the phone, Cassavetes gives him this look, and it just stays on the screen and stays on the screen where he's trying to read what that moment is.
When he gets off the phone in the bar?
In the bar.
Yes, in the bar.
And then he does it again out on the street with the watch.
Well, before they go out into the hotel lobby.
It is a good question in a funny way. I think
He's constantly reading him.
Well, that's interesting. It's more interesting than I thought. It's such a tradition in this world that when you've stolen something, when you know a hit is on you, and you know that the guy they're going to call to set you up is your best friend, because he's the only guy you'll kind of trust, even though he's always the only guy. But that it goes on and on. It's like a tradition. Guess who killed me? My best friend. So I guess yes, I guess he kind of knew, but he calls anyway. This is really the way it happens. They always call their best friend. The best friend always sets them up. They have to. Sometimes the best friend actually kills them by himself, but they have to do it. It no longer exists, this kind of gangster tradition. No, it's all in politics. No, but in Chicago, that was the tradition, that you couldn't go to a judge. You couldn't find you innocent or guilty. You took for granted when money was gone, that the guy who took it was guilty, and you were always right. And the guy who took it always kind of knew that you'd find out, and couldn't leave town, never left town. It really was Greek. It was like fate. You thought, well, you schmuck, why did you steal? But they always stole, and they always got shot. It was not an untrue story. And that's why it interested me.
You know, you talk about it in such a personal way, but as we look back on it, it seems so contemporary, the story, and it resonates in other ways maybe than the way you originally thought about it. So when you look back at some of the things that you've written, do you see them in different ways than when you originally did it yourself?
Well, I wrote this very early, as I said, as a play, very early when I left, Chicago. When I left that particular life, I thought about it. It really interested me in another way than it did when I was living it, or when it was being lived around me, and then I would never have thought of it past. Once I was in New York, once I was doing something else, but I did think of it, and then I remembered the play. And I don't think I could ever write anything sort of like it now, because I'm so far away from it, and the people and their humor, and that's not true. I could write it now.
It is an amazing structure, the way you do go, this sort of dance that goes on between the two of them, and with the audience, where you are wondering where you are, who do you like, who do you, and you get to that point in the cemetery, the extraordinary sequence in the cemetery where he actually almost inadvertently wins Mikey over. And then the bus sequence following it, where he says, "I'm going with you. I'm going to take," and you're absolutely, he's.
Yeah, and he screws it up with the girl.
And then he screws it up with the girl.
The thing is that I don't remember if this was true or whether I thought of it, that the younger brother, as I said, they were brothers, was mischievous, and so stupidly mischievous in a funny way. Because he did actually get killed, but he, as things were going well, he would put his finger in, he would mix it up, he would take a risk, he would dare you. He was that kind of guy. So, but I was so close to it when I wrote it, the play, that I don't know if I could do it again right now with that particular knowledge.
That certainly comes across here. I mean, that's exactly what you see with Cassavetes' portrayal with this character, with the writing of this character, that every time things are, he purposely kind of messes around with things in the black bar. He and his wife and the bus driver.
I think that's what they said the younger brother was like. He was that kind of guy who did that to you, stupidly, I think. But I want to say this about John, because people ask if he improvised. He was the most method actor ever. He had to know everything. He had to know every word. And as with Peter, they were not improvisers. They were wonderful actors. They really were. Mm-hmm. And they sounded improvised because they really sounded like they were saying it. And people ask me that all the time, and John especially he really had to know. And when I said cut, John would say to Peter, she hated it. and and Peter said, how are you? She just said cut. But he was always right, John. And I tried, and years later I figured out why he was always right. It's because he hated it. And he knew if he didn't like it, I wouldn't like it. That was because he sounded like omniscient. She hated it. What? She hated it. All she said was cut. She hated it. And he just knew. He knew because he hated it.
So I was in the editing room during that time period, and there's a lot of footage. I think that there was 1.5 million feet of footage.
Yeah.
And you had this scripted piece. How did you keep in your head what the story was and how you were going to find those characters?
Like talk in my head?
Well, talk about editing a little bit in terms of what that was like, that period.
But movies, although edited, are also written. And you look at what you wrote and you think, it's that scene.
Do you want?
Right, but you were looking for performance and different kinds of...
Yeah, but you know what, you're not a schmuck after you've written it. I mean, you understand what it's about, because otherwise, somewhere you understand where it's about, not literally. So you kind of know what you were always wanted to have happen. You know when you write a movie, especially this kind of movie, you know exactly what's going to happen. You know what's going to happen in the end. How it happens and how it gets there, you sort of do it within the movie. But you always remember what you had in mind originally.
But do you ever feel like it's unfinished? I mean, like, at some point, they say, you have pencils down, or you have to stop at some point. So
What do you mean stop? What do you mean?
Stop editing and let the movie come out. So do you feel that you keep working until somebody tells you have to stop?
Well, you mean during my lawsuits?
Yeah.
No, the movie was in trouble from the beginning because I stupidly cast the head of Paramount as the killer. And he took the part. And we're in rehearsal in San Francisco, and the phone rings. Well, we're in rehearsal, and we hear a loud voice. We don't know what the voice is saying. And the guy hangs up and says, I quit, and leaves. And it turns out that the guy who's calling was the head of Paramount, who didn't know that he had taken the part of the killer in my movie. He was the man who owned Paramount. And the man who ran Paramount were the two things and people involved. The man who ran Paramount was the guy that I cast, who said okay. The guy who owned Paramount was really displeased because he was at rehearsal. He never told him. He didn't say, I'm playing the part of a killer, I won't be around much. And he was fired.
Was that Yablans?
That was LeBron's.
Frank Yablans?
Frank LeBron's. And
he was originally cast as
the killer.
As the hitman.
And because he was a very tough guy, and I said, just do it as you would any contract that you're actually making for the studio. And he did. He was wonderful. We were in the middle of a scene when the phone rang, and we heard a loud voice as he answered it. And the moment he hung up, he said, I quit, and he left. And I said, and John said, I think that was, the head of the studio. And I said, well, it's not going to bother us. And John says, yes, it is, because we saw him humiliated, and he's going to get us. And he got us. He made it miserable for us. He was very humiliated. So that's another thing I learned. Don't humiliate the head of the studio.
Well, I don't know if you want to get into this, but you did there were troubles at the end of the film, and it was Barry Diller who
I was
wanted
sued. I was sued, the longest lawsuit in Hollywood. Yes. Well, he was very tough, Yablans, the guy who had taken the role as a killer and been humiliated. And he made it very tough. He would not send money on time. And he kept us up. And finally, and it was very difficult to edit it afterwards because it was, sound was off and everything was, because there was no money. What did you ask?
Well, I mean, eventually it came to a point where they wanted to take the movie away from you.
They didn't realize that there was a new, they fired him and they brought in Barry Diller. But the guy who took over didn't realize that the setup of the movie. I mean, I think he thought it was a comedy too. And then it wasn't a comedy, and he already hated Frank Blondes. So there was already, never do a movie in a studio where they're changing the head of it to another head of it, because the next head of it is not going to like the last head of it. Anyway, they didn't like it, and they didn't like your blondes, and they sued me. And they sued me for almost a year.
And at some point, they tried to physically remove you from the picture and
well,
take
they couldn't remove me from the picture. They tried to remove the picture from me. But it was gone. And it was, and my lawyer had said, they called me a strange phone call, and I spoke to actually Peter Falk's lawyer, because I had no lawyer, and I said, you know, they said this funny thing to me on their telephone, etc. And this lawyer said they were going to take the movie. A guy's going to come and take the movie. It was like the movie itself. I said, a guy's going to come and take the movie? He said, here's what I want you to do. Leave the door unlocked, put the film on where it can be seen, and get out of there and take your editor with you. And I thought, this is so like a movie. I said, okay, and do it tonight. And I did it. And the next day when I came in, the movie was gone. And they felt that I hadn't taken it. I really hadn't. It was gone. And they sued me to get it back, and I had no idea where it was. It was almost as interesting as the movie. No fucking idea where it was. and the guy who wrote The Godfather called me on the telephone and said, I'll hide your movie for you. I said, what? Because it was already known that the movie was gone. It was a lawsuit. It was a famous lawsuit, but you know, nothing lasts, so that fame is gone. But this guy called me and he said, I'll hide your movie for you.
This is Mario Puzo, the guy who wrote The
guy
Godfather?
who wrote it, yes, Mario Puzo, who I didn't know. But he was a client of my lawyer, or Peter Falk's lawyer, who was then my lawyer. I said, I thank you very much, but I don't know where it is. He said, I understand. Now, and I didn't know where it was I really didn't know where it was. And finally, after about a year of going in, and it cost a lot of money. I mean, it would have cost a lot of money if I had any. Finally, the people who were working for Paramount came in, we were in a meeting, and said, we spoke to a judge in New York, which where it was shot, and he said if it had been taken over the border, she can go to jail. One of the men in the room said, there was silence, said, do we really want to be the only studio that has ever jailed a director for going over budget? And my lawyer, who was very smart, said, you wouldn't do this if she wasn't a woman, which is probably not true, but anyway, they tried to make, they said, well, just give it to us. We'll give you money. We'll make a deal. We'll make a new deal. We're stopping the lawsuit, they said, because they got really nervous that I would be jailed. I said to my lawyer, where is the movie? He said, I don't know, but I can find out. And what he had done was, he said, he had gone to everyone I knew, my husband, my children, my friends, and said they're going to take Elaine's movie tomorrow morning if it's still in the editing room. And he had no idea who'd taken it, but it turned out that my husband, who was a doctor, had driven over, because he said leave the door open, had driven over, taken the movie, and given it to a surgeon who was living somewhere in the hills, I forget, where he was out of town. He had no idea what he'd given him. He said, just keep this. The guy lived out in the country, and we had to drive out, and he was a surgeon. My husband was an analyst, and he said to the surgeon, do you have that movie a year ago? He said, the movie. He had no idea what he'd taken. He said, I gave you a thing. And he said, oh, yeah, it's on a shelf. He gave it to him, and we returned it because what had happened was my lawyer, who was a really good lawyer, said he spoke to, he really didn't know where the movie was because he didn't know who had taken him up on what he said. Because what he had said is, if you want to save Elaine's movie, something like that, the door is open and it's on the shelf and they're coming to take it. It really was like a movie itself. And this surgeon out in, I forget where, said, here, is this what you mean? And he gave it to me and I gave it to them and we settled it.
And
Actually, they actually gave me the movie back because they didn't want to promote it. They felt it would be such a flop. And one of the men who worked there, Julian Schlossberg, quit after a while and then called me up and said, I'm a distribution company. I've started a distribution company. You want me to distribute your movie? Where is it? I said, it's in a shelf in the kitchen. I have no idea what to do with it. He said, I'll distribute it. Because Paramount said, we're not going to distribute this movie. It'll cost a fortune and a bomb.
Yeah, as I recall, I mean, I remember when the movie came out, I was here in New York, and I thought, wow, I want to see this movie. There's a movie from Elaine May, and within a week, I looked at the paper to try to find the movie again to see where it was. I mean, within 1 week, it was not there. It was out of the theaters, and the same thing happened in L.A. As a retribution, they put her movie in the theaters, as far as I know, and within a week, pulled it.
Well, really, yeah, they put it in because they knew it would bomb, because it wasn't a comedy. And the way I met Julian Schlossberg, who became my producer for life because he owed me, he said he had told me, because he had worked for Paramount, and I said, they were going to put the movie out at Christmas. I said, is that a good time? And he said, yeah. But he was then guilty because he kind of liked the movie, and he knew that it was going to be bad at Christmas. And he sort of defended it, and I think sort of quit because he knew that it was
Dirty.
It was
Dirty trick. Well,
there's the affirmation is tonight.
What?
People coming to see the film tonight.
I made it as interesting as I could.
and also, this is a version that Phillip and Elaine worked on to get it looking as good as it looks.
Yes. I must say that without this guy, without Phillip Schopper, I don't know what condition it would have been in. We got it off his shelf. It was, but he fixed it.
it was my pleasure.
Okay, so we're going to ask you guys to stay in your seats while Phillip and Elaine leave. And
Are we leaving?
Walk this way. Yes.
Why don't I follow you?
All right.
you might give her another applause. Yeah.